Oh yeah, that's right. I'm back here again, and we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons. We're talking about Dungeon Master tips, and we're talking about large groups. Because unfortunately for me, I have had plenty of experience, and it seems to be a topic that people want me to talk about. So I'm going to talk about it. Now I hate to say it, but I have a whole lot of notes here. I thought there was like going to be just a few little things I could write down, but actually right now I'm looking at 4 pages of stuff. So if you're expecting a short video, it's not going to happen. Okay, so settle down and I will give you everything I can possibly think of that I've done, tried, and know of. You will find the start time for this video down in the description. Yeehaw, good news, right? Good news. It will go unlisted though and only be available for players who are not players but for patrons. Because that's what I do with my live streams that go unlisted. The edited version will get released later on. What I do is I normally present everything first and then open it up for questions and answers. Okay? All right, so let's crack into this and make everything work quickly and swiftly. But honestly, there's a lot of material to cover. There really is. There's so much stuff I can talk about. Easy peasies. Right, pull out the earplugs. Right, here we go. Settle down. We've got a lot to work through, so we will. There we go. I'm in there. I'm in. Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, not necessarily Dungeons and Dragons 5e or even Pathfinder, because all of this really applies to a large extent. Not all of it, but a lot of it extends to all the role-play games, depending on what you're playing. Large groups, that's what we're going to talk about. How do you run a large group of Dungeons and Dragons players or any other role-play game? How do you run those large groups? Unfortunately for me, I've been involved in organised play and I've had to do it many times. And because there were so few dungeon masters around at the time I was dungeon mastering, about 2014, I had big tables, really big tables. So therefore it got quite difficult. So let's talk about what happens when you deal with scale. The problem with a large group. What is a large group of players? Well, for Dungeons & Dragons 5e, between 4 and 5 players is the sort of what the game is designed for. Anything greater than 5, so 6 plus, is really a large group. My preference is to run a group of about 6 players, and anything bigger than 6, so 7 and upward, for me, is going to be larger than I would want. And everybody's actually very different in terms of what they consider to be a large group. Okay, so that's the first step we need to deal with. Now, when you get a whole lot of players wanting to play the game, which not necessarily is always the case, but it does happen, it's very hard to turn people away. And I would say to you that if you are in a situation where you are uncomfortable with running a large group, don't feel bad about turning people away, because you have to look after yourself. I've seen people who Dungeon Master run a big group and they just look a mess at the end. So I just want to warn you against doing that, because it's not good for you. The first thing I would say, and it's not the only thing I'm going to say, and that is, if you have to deal with a large group, personally I would not run a large group if I were you. I would just avoid it. And there's a lot of different reasons why you should avoid running a large group. Everything just takes more time. Players are going to get bored and they're going to have to wait a lot longer. You as the Dungeon Master can't even imagine the amount of extra work you are going to have to deal with. There is so much more. Usually when I had to deal with large groups, I would start looking for a Dungeon Master, somebody who could take over, and I could split the group. So if you can split your group into 2, if possible, do it. That's your first go-to. I have spent many hours teaching new players how to play, and the one thing you don't want to do is have new players in a large group. That is a bad combination. They will likely not come back, so don't do it if you can. Okay, I don't recommend it. Always put the new players into a smaller group. that's a much better way of operating. And if you're using a new rule system or game system or you're new to Dungeons & Dragons 5e or any version of the game whatsoever, look, I would not even attempt a large group. You do really need to be quite skilled, and you need to be prepared to deal with a lot of the hassle that will come with that, because everything just gets magnified as soon as you deal with more people. Don't accept those lone wolf characters. When your players show up and say, I want to play a lone wolf character, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding. No, that's not happening. Okay, forget about it. You can play that in somebody else's group. It's not going to happen in my group. That is my suggestion to you. Don't do that. Don't allow that to happen. There is no time for character spotlights in a big group. There really isn't. Because if you have something in the vicinity of 6, 7 and upward, imagine if you have 10, 12, 13 players. Do you really think that you have time to spend a little bit of time on each individual character's character development? There isn't time. There really isn't. What you will find, unless you have a group of people who are willing to sit there and do nothing for a very long period of time, they will get bored and they will start getting disruptive. They will start checking their phone. They will start doing other things. They'll get up and go to the toilet. They'll go and have food. They'll go and chat on their phone. They'll go and do other things. So I don't even think about it. The story, the main goal, the main adventure hook, that is the focus for you now. Everything else, pointless. Okay, so we're back to my face. There is a couple of things I noticed. I've covered some of the basics around large groups. What I have noticed is there seems to be this thing floating around YouTube and the internet that talks about using an assistant dungeon master or a co-DM to run a large group. Honestly, pointless. If you have another dungeon master or somebody who can be an assistant to a dungeon master, they might as well be a dungeon master, split the group, so it's pointless. When I hear that, it just frustrates me. It's always a poor quality experience for everybody involved, dungeon master and player, when the group is large. So if you're going to use assistant dungeon masters and co-dungeon masters, good for you, but I think it's foolish. Don't do it. Okay, so you need to have a session 0. If you start off with a big group, have a session 0, and one of the things you have to talk about is the fact that you have a large group to manage and deal with. And there are going to be a few things and strategies that we're going to put into place to make sure everything works well. Some of the things that I would say in a session 0 is you need to be prepared. You need to have something ready to go when it's your turn when dealing with combat. In some cases, dependent on the group, I've even had people put their hands up. But you need to sort of talk about the fact that the focus needs to be the main story. If you have a big, huge, long backstory, I don't have time to read your backstory. If it's more than a paragraph, the chances are I won't even remember it. And most dungeon masters, unless they have a whole lot of notes, we're going to have a whole lot of notes for like 7+ players all along your dungeon master screen, so you can remember what every single character's doing. No. I know it sounds really, really bad, but honestly, I've dealt with this so many times, and you do have to have a session 0. If they are playing at high level play in a large group, disaster. I wouldn't even go anywhere near it if I was you. And if you're going to do it, you need to have people prepared to wait a long time, and they need to have multiple sets of dice. So a lot of the strategies that I'm going to talk about, you should be talking about in your session 0 so that it's absolutely clear what's going on. Otherwise, things aren't going to work very well for you. Okay, so the main story is the focus. Individuals, forget about it. There's no way you can maintain those two things and have speed of play and quality of play. You can't have your cake and eat it too, as a lot of people have said. You know the saying, right? Can't have your cake and eat it too. One of the things you can do, and I used to do quite often, is I never knew how many people would be sitting at my table. I could have 4 people at my table when I was doing public games, or I could have 13. I had 13 people show up to fight the last battle of the Rise of Tiamat. So you need to prepare before the game session. sorts of things that you can do to help speed up play and make things work for you? Well, draw your maps out in advance. There's a reason why I had so many maps that were pre-made that I could just pull out of my case. So I didn't have to draw anything. You just chuck a piece of paper over it if you're worried about a fog of war. But honestly, half the time I never even worried about that. If they could see the entire location, who cares? Okay? Set up your Excel sheets. Make sure you have your encounter notes already ready to go. So you've already drawn out, okay, I've got this many monsters. This is monster 1, 2, 3, 4. This is how many hit points. Have that already written out on a piece of paper. Already rolled for the kind of initiative they're going to have. Okay, if you're dealing with initiative, there's no reason why you can't do those things. You can do all of that and have those sheets ready to go, whether you're using digital or paper versions. Get a timer. I know that sounds strange, but seriously, whether you use a digital timer or you get yourself one of those egg timers, those hourglass timers. I used to get myself an hourglass timer, and it was very small, and I would just turn it over, bam, plonk it on the table, make a decision. Those egg timers can range from about 30 seconds through to about 2 minutes. You want to get one that's really short and small and works through quickly. A 30-second timer is great. Maximum of 1 minute. I feel like a 1 minute timer is not a great option. 30 seconds is a great. I like 30 seconds. I feel like that's enough time for the brain to process and do something. Get yourself a bell. If you aren't the sort of dungeon master who feels comfortable with going slam on the table when everything gets out of control and it gets too noisy, then get yourself a bell. Ding! You get their attention. That's one of the best ways you can deal with getting control of the table when it gets out of hand, and it will get noisy and people will do those sorts of things. So therefore, a bell is really good. Otherwise, big book, slam on the table. Okay, cheating. I want you, at this point when it comes to preparation as a dungeon master, I want you to cheat, and I want you to junk all of your old dungeon master methods. They don't work. They no longer apply. Okay, you're dealing with a large group, so all of those traditional things that people said you should do it this way, it's not really functional anymore. I'm sure there'll be somebody out there who will argue the point with me, but given that I've done so many of these in large groups, I will tell you now, you need to junk all of that nonsense and forget about it, okay? And when I say cheat, I'll explain to you what I mean by cheating, because cheating is going to be one of your biggest tools in dealing with a large group. Here we go. Have your initiative pad, okay? I covered the Pathfinder combat pad recently. Now, the great thing about this is you want to have this prepared already, or you want to have tags for the monsters and the players all ready to go, already in advance, so you don't have to do it at the table. That's a bad thing, okay? Anytime you can roll initiative in advance is always good. Yep. Particularly, even if the players aren't there, you can deal with your monsters. You can at least roll initiative for them in advance. And the great thing about having an initiative pad, whether it be something you buy or make, is you give it to the players. That's why you're preparing it in the first place, so you don't have to deal with it anymore. Don't over-design your encounters. I know when people start thinking about a large group, they think, okay, now I have to design my encounters. I need to change everything, because honestly, it is actually a trap. You can over-design, because what you want to do is you want to add more monsters, right? No, you don't. If anything, you want to reduce the number of monsters. And if you don't reduce them, you want to leave them the same. Adding more monsters increases the amount of time it will take for you to actually run your combats. And I will explain the concept of what happens with combat when you're dealing with a large group, because a lot of people will assume that combats get longer, but they don't. And I'll explain how that works very shortly. So forget about encounter balance. It's gone, because nothing in that Dungeon Master's Guide will help you outside of the parameters that the game was built for. So you can use multipliers all you like, it won't help you in the slightest. Forget about game balance. Forget about calculators, trying to figure out the correct amount of XP to be earned, or the difficulty for dealing with a group. Because once you start dealing with groups that are in the vicinity of 7, 8 and upward, there's nothing you can plan for. Absolutely nothing. It just doesn't work. Okay, so can you design your encounters? So this is where we need to start getting into the nitty gritty. How do I design an encounter for a large group of players at my table? As I said, less monsters and add more hit points to the monsters that are already there. You can add actions to your monsters. They might have the same type of action, but give them multi-attack so they do more attacks. Remember, the players now have access to more actions than your monsters. And the only way to increase the number of actions that your monsters do, you would have thought would have been to add more monsters, but you don't have to do that. Give them multi-attack. Why not? You have fewer monsters that do more attacks, and they have more hit points. And this is where I would go with your design for an encounter for a large group. Use fewer casters of magic. Now, magic is always one of those things that's very complicated. If you're going to use a caster, make sure it's got a very simple, pre-programmed process. All of your spells are ready to go. You know exactly how they work. Grabbing the spell book cards is a great idea if you're going to use a magic user, and the focus for that particular encounter is the magic user and some minions or something like that. But do not try to play multiple casters in an encounter with a large group. You will just sit there having to truck through gobs and gobs of information before you can actually make anything happen. And the more time you take, the more time the players feel they can take. So you need to be able to role model and demonstrate how to play quickly. Now, fair enough, you are dealing with more than everybody else, so I totally understand that. Okay. Avoid complex encounters. What does that mean? That means multiples of different monsters. So if you have like 3 or 4 different types of monsters in your encounter, that's getting complex. 1 or 2 is better. And if you want to use 3 or 4 different types of monsters in the same encounter, use a wave. So the first wave is monster type 1, goblins. Monster type 2 comes in later, and that's your orcs. And then when all the goblins and orcs are gone, then you can start bringing in your ogres or whatever else that you have planned. Okay, so use a wave. Don't build complex encounters. They take longer and they're harder to run. Don't use complex monsters either. A complex monster is a legendary monster. So if you're going to use a legendary monster, you need to do a bit of prep around that. And I know it's going to happen at some point. At some point, Fred, I know you're saying it, Fred, at some point I have to use a complex monster. But you can simplify things, and I'll explain to you how to do that. So I've already said adding hit points to your monsters is a good idea, and you'll find that adding hit points is something you need to do not just before the game, but during the game. Because you'll notice, as I explain what happens with combat in a large group, is it actually means that you will often not even get to the end of round 1. There's so many people playing the game, you won't even get to the end of the last person's turn before the round is over. Because, of course, the only way to do that is to add more monsters and make everything a lot longer, which is not what you're wanting to try and do. Don't do that. Use the average damage for your monster. So in the stat block for your monsters, you'll find there's a section where it shows and explains to you how to roll damage. So what do you roll for your damage and what you roll for your hit. And there's a number that's static. That's your average damage. What I want you to do is use the average. No dice rolling for damage for monsters. Forget about it. I know the only time you need to do it is when there's a critical. Otherwise, you're actually adding more complexity and it'll take a lot longer for you to do everything. You could say, okay, but Fred, I can roll the attack roll and the damage at the same time. But the thing is, when I run an encounter with multiple monsters, I roll all of my attacks all at once. Every single one of them. I don't roll my damage and my attack. I roll all the attacks all at once and I just use the average. That's it. I'm done. I'm dusted. I can now hand over the turn to a player. And that's what I want to try and do. This is a good time to forget about using miniatures, maps. You can still use the dice, but use theatre of the mind. Yep, seriously. It will solve you a lot of problems for you. It will create problems for people who want to use area effect spells and area effect abilities, but time-wise, laying out a mat or map and miniatures and setting everything up always consumes more time, so ditch it, go with theatre of the mind. It will solve a lot of your problems. Okay, increasing monster damage is by far one of the best ways to deal with a large group. Don't do it when they're level 1. Do it when they're about level 3 upward. Okay, start adding in another d6 of damage with your monster. You can, in some cases, depending on what level they are, you can double the amount of damage they put out. Just take the average and multiply it by 2. Very simple. Trim out conditions that a monster might impart that require you to essentially track something for just one round, or a number of rounds, or until somebody makes a saving throw. I would modify your monsters when it comes to a condition and say, look, when this condition comes into play, it stays in play for the rest of the encounter. If you're going to have a condition, just leave it in play, and it doesn't. You've either save or you don't. Really simple. Otherwise, it's hard to know when that encounter drops out and when it comes in. Okay. And to be honest, you're going to forget most of the conditions your monsters have and special features that they do when you're running a large group. I found I would forget them constantly and feel quite frustrated that my encounter was not as good as it could have been. And if I had only just applied it once and not worried about having to track it every round, because it was always in place, because I was worrying about, okay, now the player needs to roll a save at the end of their turn or whatever it was, and I would forget about doing that, so ditch it. Okay, here we go. So that's you as the dungeon master and your preparation and how you approach everything. What about delegating tasks to your players? Oh yeah, they're there too. They're supposed to help you, man. You're not the only one who's playing the game. So if they want to play in a big group because they don't want to be, moved on or said, look, I don't want to run the game, they're going to help you out. And when a large group says, no, we don't want to do that sort of thing, we don't want to help with the tasks, that's the first person to go. Okay? Honestly, first person to go. Now, I know you're dealing with friends and family, and so that's a lot more difficult, but honestly, you're going to have to say, look, if you're going to play, you have to do some of these things. Otherwise, it's way too hard. Okay, so what are the things that players can do? They can track the turns and the initiative. We already talked about an initiative board. Whether you have little tags that sit on the Dungeon Master screen, you can have the player set up all of those little tags along the Dungeon Master screen so everybody can see, okay, from left to right. Left is the first person and on the right is the last person. And you have your initiative, including the Dungeon Master, and they can see where their turn is and where they are. Make sure everything is bold and easy to read, so it's very, very clear. Otherwise, you have an initiative board that is not hidden under somebody's seat or whatever. It is out and easy to see so that people can see what's going on. And if somebody has the initiative board and it's their job to make sure that people know when it's their turn, they are the one who needs to remind somebody, look, you need to make sure you're prepared, you're next. Get ready, okay? Get them to track conditions. Whether you use some sort of token or anything to put around something, it doesn't matter. Get them to track that sort of stuff, because it'll be too hard for you to actually focus on that. A different person to track conditions. You've got enough people. You've got an army at your table. They can do some of this stuff. Get somebody, if you really want to check on rules, and with a large group, it's really pretty hard. My suggestion is, get somebody who is a rules lawyer who you trust, and they check the rules. You're not going to stop and wait for them, but they can check things if it's really necessary. So we know what's going to happen later on if it's something that's going to be an issue. But don't use that card very often, okay? I would leave that. I found myself having to retrospectively do stuff, and that used to annoy me immensely. Okay, so drawing maps. Get them to do their charting, charting out their location. Get them to draw the map up. If you've got a map and you've photocopied it and you need to draw it up because you didn't have time to draw it up yourself because you've only got one writable battle mat or whatever, and you're going to use a grid, then give them the pen, give them the map, and say, here, draw this up. Don't worry about the fact that they can see everything. If you're really worried about secret doors and so forth, then get a marker and put it through the photocopied version. Okay? Get them to get out the miniatures you need. Okay, I need 6 orcs and a orc chief. Find me something appropriate, please. And somebody has the box of miniatures and they get them out. Get them to take the notes on the game session. You don't have time to take notes anymore. Forget about that. Somebody else is going to take the notes and they'll email them to you or send them to you or give you the written version of the notes. Makes life a lot easier. Get somebody else to recap. While they are chatting just before the game, you are setting everything up, and instead of recapping, get them to recap. If they make a mistake, you can fill in the gaps if you really want to, but actually not terribly important. And I know a couple of dungeon masters who are going to say, oh, I don't know about that. But seriously, it's about running the game, getting it done efficiently and effectively, and not going insane, and making sure people have a good time and don't get bored. That's really what your goal is now. It's a very, very different goal when you're dealing with a large group. Make sure somebody else does all the recording of loot. If there is information that they need on magic items and so forth, just tell them, look, you need to look up this thing in the Dungeon Master's Guide, give them the Dungeon Master's Guide, or have somebody with the Dungeon Master's Guide right beside them when they need to note down what a special magic item does, so you don't have to look that up. Somebody doesn't know how a magic item works, that's the person they go to and they look it up in the book. Very, very simple, easy peasies. So you've delegated all your tasks. We are not finished though. You need to reduce distractions and noise in the environment you are playing in. One of the most difficult things to do. So phones are a distraction. I know some people say, look, collect all the phones up and put them aside. Yeah, good luck doing that. If it works for you, wow, wonderful. With a large group and you think you're going to collect all those phones, the chances are, if you do your job right, you'll figure out how to make them use their phones to actually run the game more efficiently. Something I think I've talked about before. So you can collect them, but noise factor from other things going on around you. Game stores are a tough place to run a game. I've done it before, and so outside noise, difficult. I have on occasions gone and seen the store owner and said, look, I'm running the game, but there's so much noise taking place, I cannot hear, and I have to shout over the top of everybody. So reduce the amount of distraction and noise in the environment you're playing in. People talking out of character or about something that's unrelated to the game. Talking out of character, no. There's no side chatter. So this is what I used to do in my game, and a couple of my players used to tell other players what would happen. Essentially, somebody talks out of character in a jestful manner, so forth, and I will take that as that's what their character said. And that eliminates all of that side chatter. It's a very easy and quick, simple way of dealing with things. Initially, you'll get a couple of players who will be upset and annoyed by that, but they will learn very quickly that they need to be careful about what they say, which is why they need their phones so they can text their mates beside them if they need to make a side chatter comment, which is why I'm saying don't take the phones away, but you don't really want them playing games on there. Okay, because I'll need that for communicating when they want to do something that's unrelated or a discussion that might break up the main table. Dungeon Masters, this applies to you. Talk less. Be conservative with the descriptions you use. You have between 2 to 3, maybe 4 sentences that you can say before you need to stop and let the players do the rest. You cannot sit there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes and describe all this stuff. Just get it done. Even if you leave out some stuff, it doesn't matter. The players are going to ask you questions anyway. So Dungeon Masters, talk less. Talk a lot less. Okay, hands up. Player wants to do something, hands up. Honestly, with a large group, sometimes it's the only way to get anywhere. You'll find that the loudest, most obnoxious, and the most dominant players at the table will look after themselves. And those people who are watchers and not quite so aggressive or not so assertive will probably get forgotten. So put in hands up And then you can go through the hands. So what do you want to do? Hands up. And then go through each person. Okay? They get them to explain what they want to do, tell them what they need to roll or do, or whether they can do it or not, and go from there. So I know it sounds like you're at school, but honestly, it works really well. Feels a bit strange to begin with, though. Ditch initiative. Initiative in Dungeons & Dragons is a big problem. It slows the game down a massive amount. I've done videos on different types of initiative and how to approach it. Personally, I feel that initiative is a big problem, but I would ditch conventional initiative in your game. It doesn't work, not with a large group. And I will explain some alternative methods for using initiative later on in this video. Okay? Players, you need to tell your players and explain to them, look, you have to work as a team. If you start getting into a long-winded argument and discussion about how to do something, or there's two groups discussing two different options, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere, you as the Dungeon Master are going to break that up. Now, how do you break it up? You're going to move the story on. Things happen. While they were talking and discussing everything, because they're talking in character, right? The monsters did something else. The villain has actually moved their plans forward because they didn't make a decision about what to do next. Often I would just, when I would run a game, I would just say, what are you going to do? And I put the egg timer out and I'd turn it over and have it ticking along. 30 seconds. And they're all like, oh God, we've only got till the hourglass. I think he's put us on a timer. We need to make a decision quickly. That is a really good way of getting the players to actually make a decision, particularly when you have too many people with too many different plans going on at the same time. They have to work as a team together. And sometimes they'll make poor decisions, but it doesn't matter. You're running the game. You can fix all of that. Quick on the rules. You need to be quick on the rules. If you don't know what the rule is, don't look it up. Just make a ruling, move on. If you want to really worry about it later on, get somebody else to look it up, and you'll deal with it when it comes up again, okay? But otherwise, forget about it, move on. Get a time. Oh dear. Get a time for your players to understand that when it comes to combats will get, waiting times get longer and longer and longer for each player. Okay, honestly, the waiting time for each player gets so much longer for each player, and including the Dungeon Master. And if you put more monsters in, it gets longer again. But what happens with combat with a big group is because, particularly if the Dungeon Master rolls really, really low or even high, is the last person at the very bottom of the initiative order, you might only have one round of combat, and then that's it, it ends. You don't even get to the bottom of the initiative. It's happened to me so many times. I can't even count. It used to be quite frustrating. I have a fix for that, okay? I have a fix for sorting out the problem with your rounds not getting to at least through so everybody gets a turn for that combat. It's going to happen. It definitely will happen, but there's a fix for it. Don't worry. Okay. They need to think about what action they're going to take in advance. Pre-planning is really important. And they need to actually understand they have to pre-plan in combat and outside of combat for it to work. Otherwise, it doesn't work. You need to pre-plan everything, not just the combat section, but the outside of combat. You need to pre-plan. You need to make sure you look up everything yourself. You need to do a lot of the work that a Dungeon Master would have done when they only had a group of 4 or 5 players. Players need to be prepared ahead of time, and it's pretty obvious, right? One of the things you should have explained to your players in session 0 is that they should have a standard action they take if they cannot decide. If they cannot decide, you drop them to the bottom of the initiative or the bottom of the round, and they'll take their turn last. Okay? And if you have a pre-made standard action they can just slot in when they have action paralysis, then awesome, wonderful. And what can you do with that? Well, the mage casts their most powerful cantrip. The fighter swings their sword or uses the grapple action or a shove action, whatever they've pre-decided. Okay, and they should have it written down somewhere so they're ready to go. The ranger fires their bow. They've got a long bow, they're going to use their bow. Okay. When it comes to combat and you don't get to the end of your down the initiative order to the very bottom and the last couple of players miss out, or the last player misses out, what you're going to do is you're going to look at the monsters and see how many hit points they have left. And if the monster would have died, honestly, I know this sounds terrible, don't have it die. Let it live. Give it a few more hit points. Okay? The ranger made a bow shot, fired it, killed the last monster. But there's still somebody else. The cleric still gets to have a turn. But of course, the combat's going to end. Add a few hit points right then and there. Let the monster stay alive. The cleric gets their turn. Done. Everybody feels like they contributed to that encounter, that combat encounter. So one of the best ways to deal with this is just add more hit points to monsters to stagger things out so that your combat lasts more than one round, or more than half a round, or more than 3/4 of a round. This is one of the most common things that tends to happen with a large group, is you wind up, particularly if you don't adjust the encounters, is that you'll find that there's so many actions taking place, they just smash through everything. Okay. How do we deal with initiative? Well, there is actually quite a few different ways. You can get them to all roll initiative at the very beginning of the game session, and it's already pre-programmed, already planned out, and they keep that same initiative right throughout the entire game session, no matter what new encounter comes up. It's a very good system. It works well. I've used other systems where I have, like, with a really big table, rolling initiative in advance just doesn't work. Now, one of the better ways that you can deal with this, and particularly if you find yourself with because what will happen if you pre-roll all of the initiatives and you as the Dungeon Master roll really low and find yourself at the bottom of the initiative order and all the players get to go first, there's no monsters left to use. And it just wound up being a situation where essentially the players destroyed everything and the Dungeon Master's monsters did nothing. They were just there as a punching bag. Pop, 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 pop. Okay? So what I would suggest to you is there's a problem with using that in that respect. And if we start building in something like surprise, it gets worse. It's actually not an issue if you put your monsters at the very top of the initiative and have all of the players fall in underneath that. What I would do with a big group, if you have prearranged your initiative, is put your monsters at the top no matter what, so you get to actually use them, and then the players are after that. And what you do is you bunch them up. You use group initiative. I've done a video on the topic. You group and bunch up your players in terms of taking the action. You say, okay, you 3 or 4, tell me what you're going to do. Tell me. Okay, roll dice. Okay, yep, you can cast that spell. Where's it going to be placed? And you work through that. It only works with a very experienced Dungeon Master who can deal with group initiative. I find this will get through a lot of things really fast. Super, super useful. So when it comes to running initiative, don't think of the individual. We don't want to wait for each individual person. We want to just say, okay, this group, do what you're going to do. Let me know. Okay? And it'll get through the combat so much faster. Works like a dream. Now, if you really have a big group and even this is causing problems, you can still use the group initiative process, but you can ditch initiative completely and say, okay, this is what we'll do. I know what we'll do is, as the Dungeon Master, my monsters go first. Now, the only time your monsters going first is going to be a problem in a large group is if you have surprise on the players' characters, okay? But with a large group, they can absorb quite a lot of damage, so they should be fine. But there are times when that can be problematic. Go first and then say, okay, we're going anti-clockwise round the circle, round the table. And the next combat, we're going clockwise round the table. And this will ensure that everybody gets to at least be at the top of the initiative in some way, or at least close to it. Okay? So I found that to be much more suitable for a very large group, like 12, 13 people, 10 people. You just go around the circle. Dungeon Master starts first. Ditch your initiative. And you can, again, use the same method and apply group initiative. Like you 3 people go, take your action, or you 4 people go, take your action, tell me what you're going to do. This allows people who are taking far too much time to make decisions to actually take that time, because it doesn't matter anymore. You'd need to tick off who's actually taken their turn if you do this though. If you're not going through individual by individual through the initiative order, and you're not dropping them to the bottom of the initiative or shifting them in some way, then you need to make a note somewhere or get somebody else to make a note of who has had their turn. Little whiteboard marker and just tick things off. Very simple. Or a pen and there's a list. Done. Okay, very simple ways of dealing with a large group. When it comes to players should be rolling their attacks and their damage at the same time. None of this individual stuff. Get all the dice together and roll them. If you have multiple attacks, then you should have different colored dice to make those attacks. As a dungeon master, I always have about 20 20-sided dice, or 10 to 20-sided dice, so I can roll all of my attacks for all of my monsters all at once, and I just go up through all of that. You'll find that don't describe the player's actions. Let them do that. If you need to do any description in combat, you describe your own stuff, your monsters. That's it. Leave their stuff alone. That's their problem. They got to sort that out. Okay. I think I've covered pretty much all of the different strategies and tactics that I have used in a large group that you might find useful in your game. I don't know that I've left anything out. I think I pretty much covered the whole gambit with regard to a large group. I have to say, I don't enjoy running a large group. I feel sorry for you if you are finding yourself in a situation where that has to happen. There are plenty of dungeon masters who do develop the skills and the patience and the a really good attitude to the whole process, and they will calm right down with a large group. But I do know it's much harder to do. So if you found this video helpful, awesome. Look, I have a whole bunch of videos for players, but particularly for dungeon masters, hundreds of videos covering all sorts of different advice, monster tactics, general advice, everything you can imagine. It's there. Okay, you will find something on that topic. I have a Patreon page where you can support me, so I make more videos like this. You get free access to the live streams that go unlisted on YouTube, because nobody else does once they go unlisted, and they will go unlisted once they're no longer live. You get access to priority on the videos I make and the topics I talk about. Those are the things that you are actually getting. I will make sure you get them. I have affiliate links to the book depository and Amazon where you can buy stuff online. I get a small commission, which is really cool. And yes, you can buy all the things I've talked about down in the description. You just go through the link and then do your search. It's fine. I have a merchandise store now with Teespring where you can go and buy stuff that it's been pumped out for me. And hey, make sure to share, like, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to be notified when I go live, and I go live a lot, and when I publish new videos, which happens a lot as well. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. I survived. Don't go away. I'm still here. There's still an opportunity to ask questions. I know that sounds strange, but I'm serious. Just give me a second while I just get my glasses on. Collect my thoughts, have a bigger drink of water. I feel a bit bad because I've been quite sort of hard and harsh and quite direct about the topic, but I find with large groups it's one of the most difficult things to manage in the game. There really isn't too many. The most common thing that you can come across is a large group. You don't often come across things like people throwing the table around or stealing people's bits and pieces or having a punch up or stuff like that. But large groups definitely is a tough one. Okay, and it's common. Thank you for the super chat, Waithrus, thank you very much. Big Kid, hey, thank you very much This felt tailor-made for me. Well, Big Kid, I know you're a patron, and I do believe you have talked about wanting a video on this topic. So when I say patrons get priority on the video topic, I'm serious. I'm not pulling your leg. I'm very serious. I have paid attention. And one of the best ways, if you are a patron, is to go onto the patron page and send me a message through the patron page about what you want me to make. Because I listen to that and I can't sort of then get confused about your username on YouTube and what name you're using on Patreon or whatever else, or Twitch TV or anything like that. Lego Fry, how's it going, Lego Fry? You were first, well done. Yes, he is bragging a bit. How's it going, Darren? I am Groot. Yes, you are. You are Groot. Big Kid. I play in a group of 8 and DM a group of 8. Oh, yes. Yep. See, 8's a big group. A group of 8 is essentially twice the size, which means an encounter that would normally take 3 rounds is probably going to take a round and a half. That's honestly how long it will take, because you just doubled the amount of actions taking place. Which is why I say when it comes to combat, combats don't take longer. The waiting time takes longer, but the combats in terms of rounds get shorter because there's more people, more players taking their actions. The only time it doesn't work that way is when the Dungeon Master increases the number of monsters in a desperate attempt to balance the encounter, which is folly, unfortunately. Big Kid. Laugh out loud. My group IDM is all first timers. Oh my gosh, that is rough. I'm a first time DM. You have to be super prepared. Yes, you do. Which is where in-depth guides like you do with your channel help immensely with the starter set. So I guess when it comes to, if you're dealing with this, Big Kid, you're a new DM and you're dealing with new players, it is really important to have a cheat sheet. I used to use a cheat sheet. I didn't actually explain using cheat sheets, did I? But a cheat sheet is just one piece of paper with all of the different standard actions that a player can take. And it's bolded, so you can see, okay, disengage, this is how it works. It's essentially what would be on the inside of the Dungeon Master screen reincarnated. You've got that. Create a cheat sheet for your players and give that to them. It's actually good to do even if they're not a beginner player, but you'll find as a general rule that experienced players know all that sort of stuff already. But beginner players, cheat sheets, that's the way to go. Use a cheat sheet so they know what all the different actions are, so they can go through and decide what they're going to do, and then they can look at their character sheet if they really want. Or if they're really skilled, they'll just make something up and try and let you figure it out. Darren. I use timers too, Fred. I brought a set on Amazon, and you are just talking on about having several time types. Very prepared, Fred. Yes, there are many different types of timers you can have, but a timer is really useful. I know you can use your watch, but it's not necessarily quite the same thing. You need a timer that you can present and show to your players, something that they can see the timer ticking down or the sand falling out. That's why I use the hourglass, because they can see the sand running out, and it causes a bit of fear and not just fear, but urgency. You'll find that they will start to make decisions more quickly. I don't know what it is. It's just the idea of watching sand running out of the glass down into the bottom sort of creates that sort of, and it helps the pacing. I use the timer for pacing. It's something that Hank talks about in his videos that he does on YouTube, but his timers are often monsters rather than actual time. I find that if you're going to use a timer, use actual real time, not game time, but real physical time in the real world in your game. It makes a lot of sense to me. Walrus. Nice background, Fred. Love the live stuff. You are welcome. This is my last live stream for today before I lose my voice. But hey, thank you very much for the super chat, by the way. Okay, Big Kid. Yes, we've covered that. Okay, Joe. Fred, just wanted to say I probably became a patron soon. Hang in there. I am trying really hard to hang in there. It's been difficult, I have to say. I'm desperate for the merchandise shelf to come up on YouTube, but there's a waiting time. Even though I've got 2 products up, I have to wait for it to actually appear on my videos, and there's nothing I can do about it. And I also need people to tell me if things are too expensive, so I can trim things down. I know I need to make adjustments. I looked at some of the channels and I see they just leave it as is, and I see other channels who made adjustments, and I feel like some adjustment is required, but you do need to give me feedback on that sort of stuff. And the best place to give me feedback is in live chat, or you can use the comments, but it's not necessarily the best place. Live chat's the best place. But if you can't do live chat, comments. Okay, Mud Animal. Fantastic name, by the way. God, everybody has some really creative names that they use. Forums are your friends, and so is Fred Wheeler. I'm glad that you feel that I am your friend. Look, I'm here to help you realistically run your game in a practical manner. And if there's one thing I have done is run lots of very, very large tables. Done it so many times. I'm not the sort of dungeon master who's run games online with 13 players, but I have done it in person, and trust me, that's hard. I can't even imagine trying to do that on a live stream or online. It could just disaster. So everything that I'm talking about is things that I have done, or the dungeon masters that were under me who I helped organise when I was part of the Dungeons and Dragons Adventurers League. I would explain to them ways they would do things. They would come back and say, look, I tried doing this and this worked really well. So I got a lot of feedback from them. And I have to say, with a large group, the smartest one and the most clever use of initiative is to have the dungeon master go first, and then just pick a direction, go clockwise or anti-clockwise, and everybody just takes their turn, and you bunch them up into collections. And it works like a dream in comparison to what you could be doing. Okay, Joe, I've never run a party of more than 5. I've run the new rules for 1 player and a sidekick. Yep, cool. Oh, by the way, Joe, Patreon, when you go into Patreon, you'll find that it says $5, but there's no set amount. You can go $1 for the month. You can go $2, $3. You can pay more than $5. It's up to you. It's totally up to you. Mud Animal. What times would be my biggest concern? Okay. What times would be my biggest concern? The players feeling like they don't get to much in their session. Yeah. And that's exactly what's going to happen. Mud Animal, there's no way you can get away from it. Every time I've ever run a large table, the players always feel like they didn't get as much time to actually role play their character because the spotlight is gone. We can't do it. You know, the spotlight, if it's going to be spotlighted on them, consists of like a minute, maybe 2 if you're lucky, where they make a decision. But you can't go and I don't role play going shopping. We don't communicate with the shopkeeper. Do you know what I mean? I don't play out the shopkeeper. I say, look, what do you want to buy at the shops? Tell me whatever you want. It's in the player's handbook. Go for it. Or if there's anything additional, let me know. Otherwise, just purchase what you want from the player's handbook. Done. When it comes to potions, I'll just say, look, if you want to buy 50 potions, cool. Don't care. So a lot of the things that you have been tied and married to as a dungeon master, let it go. Okay, let it go. Be kind to yourself and be kind to your players. And a bit of understanding with your players too. Understanding that they feel like they're not getting what they want. Which is why I say, as soon as you get an opportunity, break the group up into smaller groups. Okay. Which is not always possible because you won't be able to necessarily run 2 different games and on 2 different nights or 2 different times. Hourglass style is the best, yeah, it really is. Joe, absolutely the best. Okay, Big Kid, do you have a general rule of thumb for how much more HP to add to enemies? Okay, so here we go. Big Kid, no rule of thumb. When I talked about adding hit points to monsters, just pick a number. It won't matter. Depending on dice rolls, depending on how many players there are, depending on whether you've got multiple paladins with divine smite or rogues who can sneak attack. You'll never be able to calculate and figure that out. It's impossible. So my suggestion to you is just add half more hit points. You can adjust and change and modify on the fly. If you find you put too many hit points into monsters and they're staying around too long, they're going to die. They died from their wounds. They bled out. They suddenly, oh, it's got 15 hit points, but somebody just did a hit and did 1 hit point worth of damage. But I don't want the combat to continue on. It's getting too long. It died. Yep, that's a fatal blow. Well done. Awesome. Well done. Okay, it just dies. Make adjustments on the fly. And if you can't get to the bottom of the initiative, if not everybody's going to get their turn, add a few hit points to some of these monsters. Oh, how come this orc's got more? This one's taken 11 points of damage and it's still alive. Oh, it's a different type of orc. They won't know. Or they might, but who cares? Honestly, I feel like people who say if the combat is sort of getting to the point where it's a known quantity, just leave it. But don't do that if everybody hasn't had a chance to whack away or cast a spell, because they feel like they've been left out. Okay? What? I would have been your second patron had I known that. Darren? Yeah, I've got a Patreon page. I've had one for a while, as it happens. And like I said, patrons get their videos made first. And I honestly, it was such a relief to see the payment go through. A couple of days ago, I was like, oh my gosh, there's a chance I might make it, or I might find myself having to shut down my channel and go and just do stock take at unusual times, and you'll never see me again. But we'll see how we go. You never know. Darren, different color type top for time duration. Yep. Look, anything, if you're gonna, I think one of the great things I noticed is that those little yellow rings off bottle tops and other bottles, dropping a ring around a monster to indicate its condition is a good idea, but you will forget what the red means and what the blue means and what the white means. You need another player to actually explain to you, okay, that condition is this. So they should have the color-coded conditions waiting to explain to you what's going on. And often it is really smart, considering the players can truck out so many attacks and so much damage with their characters, that you leave conditions in play rather than have people roll dice to get rid of the condition. Because you're never going to get through 3 rounds of combat, not unless you modify things and increase the number of monsters. It just doesn't happen. Fully Gamer, hello Fully Gamer, how's it going? I did get to you finally, right? How would you divide the experience points, for example, in a group of 8 players? So I did a video on milestones. Don't calculate experience. It's too hard. It's another equation. If you're the sort of person who absolutely must calculate experience points and you won't use milestones, and I recommend that you use a milestone instead, you just decide, okay, when they do this, level up. There's a much better way than trying to calculate all that stuff. It's too hard. But here is what I used to do when I used to calculate experience points, Fully Gamer. For those of you who want to know, I would add up all of the experience points for the combats and whatever I allocated for a skill challenge or a social encounter or a trap or exploration or for achieving a goal. I would add all that up and I would divide it by however many people were at the table at the time, and I would allocate those experience points to a non-existent person. Okay? I didn't get my players to track any of that because I knew they never would. I would have to track all of that myself. That's if you're dealing with a big group and you're tracking initiative for a big group, and some people come some week and some people don't come the week, and other people come, everybody's got a different calculation for their experience points. It's too hard. So I would allocate whatever I allocated for that game session for the whole group, divide it by how many of them were there, to a non-existent person, and that non-existent person, Bob, we can call him Bob, that's the level and number of experience points all of the players have, whether they show up at the table or not. It's the easiest way to deal with large quantities of players and tracking experience points. Otherwise, your players are then, you're relying on your players to try and remember to add and keep a tally of how many experience points they have, and they won't do that, and you'll find yourself with a huge list having to do that on either a spreadsheet or on a piece of paper, and then have to update all your notes. It's no, thank you. That's just me. I need a drink of water. You guys are lucky, man. We're into an hour here and I'm still here. Okay, let's get through this nice and quick, shall we? Joe, I'll look them up. I've been wanting something like that, okay? Darren, I'll find the set and post it in the group. Yes, I have a Dungeons & Dragons Facebook group called HowtoDandD. It's in the About section. It's in the top of my YouTube channel page. Just find it, go, and that's where you'll find a lot of the other stuff that the community shares with everybody, including files and other things. That's the best place to go for that sort of stuff, and that's where it's going to be going. Okay, cool, awesome. Thank you, Darren. Joe, I definitely use milestones for XP. Don't waste your time with that. Yeah, look, I did a video on milestones, and I really do feel like the whole design team for Wizards of the Coast is using milestones now. None of them use XP. Why? Because it's extra work. Why? Because it's folly. You want to count beans? Great, but I wouldn't do it. Okay, so Mud Animal. I hope you are getting the chance to be a player in a campaign. I haven't dungeon mastered for just over a year now, as it happens. I am playing a paladin sorcerer who is a wild mage, and I'm having a ball. Before that, I was playing a cleric wizard, and core blimey did I own that table. And it was funny because nobody wanted to play a cleric or a wizard, and I just wound up making a character that they couldn't get, they needed to have around all the time. Trust me, cleric wizard rocks. And I know I need to talk about that build, but I'm going to talk to my friend Simon about that before I present you with this is how I would do it, because I forgot a lot of what I did, and Simon will fill in the gaps where I need to fill in gaps, and I know he's very good at that. He's like a super nerd, whereas I'm like a primitive nerd, like a caveman nerd, only partly there. Okay. Linked post in group. Yes, okay, cool. Mud Animal. Also, Fred, have you considered setting up a Discord server for HowtoDandD? I have considered it. I would not use it because I have too many. Look, I have YouTube, I have Twitch TV, I have Twitter, which I don't use very much. I have Facebook, and if I do a Discord as well, I then have to have a presence there. I don't have time. I just don't have time. Which is why I prefer to go with Twitch TV, YouTube, and Facebook. Those are my favorites. I use Twitch TV when I'm painting on the weekends, which I believe it's Thursday today, so tomorrow is my weekend, so I'm painting tomorrow on Twitch TV and the day after. So those are my preferred options. A Discord means I need to use it. The only way I'll use Discord is if I'm running games professionally and being paid for people, and it will be a private game and nobody else will be able to get into the Discord game, or I'm using Google Hangouts, or I'm using Skype or something like that, or Roll20. But yeah, a Discord, I'm sorry, I can't see that happening. I much prefer people to post things on Facebook. I know a lot of people dislike Facebook, but I still have a Twitter account, so you can put stuff there. But honestly, The best way to get to me is through my YouTube live streams. Do it in person. At the end of all of my live streams, I always talk about whatever people want to talk about. I mean, just because I'm talking about running large Dungeons and Dragons groups does not mean I will not talk about player stuff and Dungeon Master stuff. That will happen. I'm fine with that. That's why I do it. I want you to be able to actually communicate with me in a real-time sense rather than Discord. And Discord, like I said, I can't do this as a job. I can't look at this as a job. Not yet. I'm trying, but honestly, I just don't think that there's a benefit to doing it, which is why I haven't done it. Okay, I'm going to get going. I'm supposed to be, as it happens, I'm supposed to be going and picking up some dice that I have to review because they did not deliver it to me yet again. And yes, companies are sending me stuff to review, which is good. I don't know if it'll be enough, but certainly it's happening. Okay, as I said, if you want to watch this, you need to stick around because the live stream will go unlisted and therefore it will only be available to patrons. And I don't know when I'll get a chance to edit this down. I'm doing pretty well so far, but yeah. Yep. Thank you, Mud Animal. Fair enough. Take care. All right, so let's get out of here, and I'll do my sign out. And have I even done my sign out? I don't know. Have I done my sign out? I don't know. I'm lost. Okay. Anyway, have a good night, day, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Look after your family and your friends and yourself. And hey, till next time. Keep rolling those 20s.